Hello, dear friends. We've met already a few times, and those of you who are hearing me for the first time, I'm happy to welcome you and greet you and tell you we are actually telling the story of my lifetime during the time of the Holocaust. But I have a purpose behind it, and that is to organize the people to fight anti-Semitism. So we call ourselves People United Against Anti-Semitism. And I hope you will join us in this noble effort. Today I want to discuss with you a turning point in the history of my life, the life of my hometown, Teil, and a turning point in the existence of about 4,000 Jewish people who lived in this small community for the period of 450 years. I want to speak to you about my grandfather. My grandfather, Yosef Rozwaski, was my father's father. I have very little knowledge, virtually none at all, of my grandparents. My mother's grandparents lived in another town. My mother came from a town called Lupz on the Niemen, on the river Niemen. And I have no recollection virtually of anything of my mother's background, except for one time when my father took me as a child to go with him. He was going on a business trip and took me along to visit my mother's family. That was approximately in the year 1940 or 1939, late in the year. I stayed there with my mother's sister, and there I also met my mother's mother and her grandmother. My grandmother and my great-great-grandmother. All I have as a recollection is two little old ladies, and I frankly did not know the difference who was the grandmother and who was the great-grandmother. I am named after my mother's father, so obviously I did not know him. On my mother's father's side, I only recall the funeral, the levaya of my grandmother. And I have no recollection of her in life. But I do have a recollection of my grandfather, Yosef Rozwaski. I recall having him at our Passover Seder, and I remember it must have been in 1939, 38, because my recollection doesn't go beyond that. And I recall always being attached to him. I used to go with him to the ritual slaughter for the killing of a chicken. I used to watch him as he used to take care. We used to have a shochet, a slaughterer, come to our house and sometimes slaughter, according to the laws of kashrut, a calf or a sheep. And I remember my grandfather was in charge of making it kosher. He was a porger. He knew how to take care of it, and I used to watch it. Many years later, when I was a student in the Hebrew Theological College and we studied the laws of kashrut, I recall many of the things which I saw as a child. And I had an advantage over my friends who knew nothing about, so to speak, the anatomy of animals. So I was close to my grandfather, and I used to go around with him. He used to take me for walks, and sometimes to take me here and there. And in the ghetto, I remember one day, one night, Friday night, it was a Friday. I checked it out, on the 28th, the night of the 27th to the night of the 28th of March, 1942. For some reason, it was very light in the room, very bright, a very bright, warm atmosphere. I don't recall any other such night in the ghetto or any other place. And so we had the usual Friday night meal, and we all went to sleep. And at that time, it was normal. We were all sort of crowded into rooms, families in one room, sometimes more than one family in the same room. And so we went to sleep. In the morning, when we got up, my uncle said, our grandfather passed away. What happened? My uncle told the story. He got up at night and he saw his father sitting on the bed with his feet on the floor. And he said to his father, to my grandfather, how are you feeling? Do you need anything? And my grandfather said to him, can you give me a cup of tea with a piece of sugar? So he gave me a cup of tea, hot water, with a cube of sugar. And my grandfather drank it. And then my uncle says, he asked him, he should help him pick up his legs and lie down on the bed. He picked up his legs. He helped him to lie down, and he fell asleep. And my uncle went to the other room. And the morning when he got up, my grandfather was dead. The funeral took place the next day. And that's all I remember of the occasion, the people carrying him out of the house on Sunday morning. In subsequent times, I recall my uncle always saying, this was the last Jewish funeral in our town. That was my grandfather was the last Jew who was given a Jewish religious burial in our community, in our city. Because afterwards, we were all killed. And to that I will come later on. So my grandfather, in many ways, marks a turning point between normalcy, if you can call a funeral a normal procedure, and turn over into a situation of destruction and death and death and death. My grandfather, therefore, was a landmark in the history of our Jewish community. After that, we remained living in the ghetto. I remember that on the roof, on the attic in the house, we tried to put in an extra wall, so to speak, a double wall, in order to create a place of hiding as a shelter in case we were going to be attacked and taken out to be killed. Unfortunately, this place was not finished, and it was really not safe enough to be able to hide behind, because you could see through, and you could feel when you went out in the attic that there was some kind of a distance. It was narrowed in the space. So we couldn't use it. We just put up some things there for storage. Otherwise, we continued living, and soon after the funeral of my grandfather came the holiday of Passover. The truth of the matter is I have no recollection of the Passover in the ghetto. I do have a recollection of a Passover the year before in our home, or maybe 2 years before, but not what happened in the ghetto, because life became so confused and so hasty. Everything was moving along in an extremely speedy fashion. My uncle and my aunt used to go out every day to work and come back in the evening. My mother stayed with us in the ghetto. She took care of us, the children. I imagine she also prepared for the meals for the evening for the people who came back from work. Other than that, life between that event and what I'm going to describe and talk about next time is a kind of a nebulous black spot. It's hard to think about it and talk about it because we were really in a shock. Remember, we only came into the ghetto in February, toward the end of February. And before we knew it, we had the funeral of my grandfather in March, roughly a month later. And then came Passover. And after Passover came the annihilation of the Jewish community in our town. So therefore, the passage of the funeral plays in a way a significant role, not only in my personal life, but also the community life. Because with the death of my grandfather, we had also, in a way, the official demise, death of the Jewish community. My recollection is a room, a house full of light, a kind of a bright, warm light, not light in the sense of being white, but kind of reddish light, like fire. It was illuminating the whole house, as though the spirit, the soul of my grandfather was being welcomed, accompanied by a whole entourage of angels that came to take him away from this world, in order he should not have to see the tragedy that befell our community in the weeks to come. Next week, next time, we will talk about the real tragedy. And I hope you will respond, not only by listening, but also giving us a thumb up, and write us a letter and tell us what you think. And also join our effort to fight against anti-Semitism. Join us, be with us, united with us, stand with us united against anti-Semitism. Till next time, I wish you all the best.